Welcome to the Building Doctor Show with Jens Johansson.
All right. Happy New Year. Welcome to the first Building Doctor Show of 2025. I'm your host, Jens Johansson. Glad to see you here to learn more about your buildings. Today, we got a really hot topic. We're talking about fire safety for your building. So thanks for all the listeners on our podcast channels and live on YouTube. But we want to encourage everybody to register for the Building Doctor Show because it allows you to answer or allows you to submit questions and have them answered live right here. So you can put your questions and comments into the chat box below or on Zoom or on YouTube, and we'll get those answered for you. So your questions are really important because they help drive and steer the show, and they're really useful for everybody. So everybody's been in that group or somebody asked that question that has helped you. You didn't think of it, but think of it as we think of it as a community, and we're all learning from each other. And so our producer, Carolyn, will be monitoring the chat, and we'll go through the Q&A panel at the end of the show. And of course, we also have some raffle giveaways at the end. So stick around for that stuff to win some cool J2 stuff and usually some candy and things like that. We'll have a picture of that later. So remember, this show is for educational content only. We're not giving legal or financial advice. So let's talk about fire safety stuff. Whoops. We can turn that off.
Welcome.
I already welcomed you. There you go. Okay. So today we're going to talk about tips on building maintenance and repairs to prevent or minimize fire damage. With the recent LA wildfires making headlines and 2023's Lahaina fires in Maui, we have some good case studies, and we're going to show you some of these houses that survived when the rest of the neighborhood burned down. But we're not really talking about wildfire safety. We're talking about fire in general. And so we can, it's good to take some action and reflect on how we can prevent fires in our communities. And this is actually how fire codes get developed. We as humans need to learn something 3 or 4 times before building codes get developed. Remember the Chicago fire? Chicago had to burn down 2 or 3 times, Mrs. O'Leary's cow and things like that. Then San Francisco had to burn down a couple times before we got our first step of our first basis of good fire codes in the building codes. So expect codes to change from these wildfires that have been going on these past few years. And so along with code changes comes more expensive, usually, building components and products. And so just kind of be aware of that. If you're considering, hey, in a couple of years, I need to do a new roof, I should really start thinking about, let's make a more robust fire resistant roof or siding, or, how can I prepare that stuff? So we're gonna talk about what we've learned around these wildfires, but there's also going to be some action items in doing this research for this show. We found some good fire safety checklists, and kind of the biggest takeaway I learned was it's not necessarily your roof or your walls. We all knew those needed, fire ratings and fire rated assemblies, but the concept of landscaping or defensible space, they call it, things like fences, whether they're stone or wood. Think about it. A cedar wood fence on a dry, hot day is just nothing but kindling. And but it's also interesting to understand how the fire works and travels through your building, either through heat or airflow. And so we'll cover some of that stuff. So, and of course, put your questions in the Q&A panel. So we'll get some of that stuff. So here is an example, not of a wildfire. This is just a recent case of ours. I'd call it a routine fire, if you will. And so I just wanted to show you kind of how the fire travels. And so here's a fence between the 2 properties. The properties are close, but kind of city setbacks of 5 foot from the property line on each side. So we got about 10 feet between buildings. But you can see the green vinyl siding. So the heat just melted the vinyl back into big puddles of plastic. But under that vinyl siding is what we call gypsum sheathing. Think of it like interior drywall, but it's exterior gypsum sheathing. And if you've paid attention to other shows, we talk about water getting into that and really making a mess of it and damaging it. But that is the exterior layer that really protected this building on the sides. It's our understanding from the fire investigators that this was an arson related fire because there was some loiterers or some homeless camps across the street and they would kind of travel through here. But the fire burned up the side and kind of burned up through the front. And so it didn't get into the framing because of that gypsum sheathing layer, but you can see how hot all these windows on this side are totally blown out. Only the second and third floor windows are blown out on the front. But the fire went up and then got inside the roof here. So this, we'll talk about roof soffits. That's the part of roof that hangs over, holds the gutter. That's a soffit or an eave. And we want ventilation there. We want the soffits to protect the siding on the building. It's kind of that overhang, but you can, it traps the fire. The fire's coming up the wall, gets stuck there and has to go out and then back around. And so talk about fire getting stuck too. So these are the deck openings that you can see on this other side. So the fire whipped up in there, kind of got caught and then burned all the way through because I don't think, looks like they had just like cedar boards or some kind of tongue and groove. Wood, of course, caught on fire, burned right through the system. So this whole area was just hollowed out because the fire went right through it. And you can see how, again, it hits the roof, had to lick back, kind of go in. And we have a lot of heat at this top part of the roof assembly. And so these windows are broken out. Second story windows are busted out. Then one more thing, the fire gets into the roof assembly. So we found that these guys had a party wall or a fire separation wall up in their attic to keep. So if the fire gets into here, it hits that wall and it doesn't get to the other half of the building. And so these units were damaged. These units were smoked, but they weren't burned. And so it's just kind of an interesting how I wanted to show how the fire travels. If you look at this photo, this is from the other angle. You can see the siding burned off on this building, but it didn't catch on, catch on fire. It definitely had some fire damage and the siding burned off, but it not as bad of damage here. So gypsum sheathing, soffits, and deck alcoves were catching the fire and kind of got trapped in there. And then we think, or the pending investigation, but it sounds like it was intentionally set, either from arsonists. So maybe there was something there, piles of garbage, dumpsters, things like that, or just general junk. I don't know, but something got this fire going and kind of torched up there. So we're gonna talk about that. So let's jump into stuff. So burnable things. So the concept of dry landscaping and debris. And so here's this top photo is a good photo of just all these dry maple leaves. At certain times of the year, all the leaves fall. Again, in that fall era, all your gutters are full of, after a good windstorm, dry branches, pine needles, just all sorts of things. This is nothing but tinder. It just can catch right on fire. So making sure we're cleaning out the dead bushes. So this dead bush is right next to a bunch of cedar trim. So if that bush catches on fire, or this landscaping and dry leaves, bark, cedar bark, again, think about mulches, think about dirt or rockery, things like that. And so just paying attention to your landscaping and what can burn around it. Now, this other photo is a whole bunch of debris and boxes and stuff, but it's out against a commercial building. Maybe this is a residential building, I don't know, but these piles are just nothing but arson attraction. And so overflowing dumpsters, etc. So we go to the next page. Lots of commercial buildings and mixed use buildings have these. So if your community is maybe has restaurants on the first floor that are just taking deliveries and they got lots of boxes, maybe there's coffee shops or whatever. But we routinely see here's pallets, here's dumpsters, here's just piles. And so in the right photo, it's back against the parking lot. It's not against the building. In the left photo, it's just right up against cedar siding. So somebody that wants to cause problems can just flick a match on that debris pile. So why we're putting this stuff in here is we see it so common. So take a walk around, look around your building. Yeah, we get it. The cardboard recycler is there, but it's great. But the bales of recycled wrapped cardboard, they don't need to sit there. They need to be away from the building. So just again, from an arsonist perspective, if I want to cause problems, that's where I'd start. Okay, this is something put out by the Los Angeles County Fire Department, and it's a good description of your house, and it's called Hardening Your House for Fire Season. And so it talks about, again, gutters, cleaning your gutters, getting rid of that leaves and pine needles and branches and things like that. Roof vents, those are those soffit vents again. Sometimes it's bird blocking, the holes that you see up there. Sometimes it's strip venting with an enclosed soffit, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But they're saying make sure you have 1/8-inch mesh covering those, or using some kind of baffles to block any embers that are blowing or fire that's licking up the side of the house and has to kind of go around it. I'll get into better pictures later. So then the windows, your single pane windows, switch to double pane. And if you're up against buildings where they're close proximity or they're close to a egress path, they need to be tempered. So the building code already has these things in it, but think about it. So again, these are maintenance of how I clean my gutters and get rid of the piles of debris, but it's also if you're thinking of it's time for new windows, it's time for new siding, it's time for new roof, maybe I should start thinking about some of this fire protection in here as well. And then remember the decks, the ceilings of the decks, they're called soffit, deck soffits. Making sure you have gyp sheathing there, covered by some kind of, you can have tongue and groove paneling on top of the gyp sheathing, but you saw in that first photo how the siding just burns off real quick. The gyp sheathing kept the fire from spreading into the wood framing and into the interior. And so that's why it's very important to make sure that that gyp sheathing isn't getting water damaged and crumbling and falling off. Otherwise, it won't do its job. So deck soffits, best of it's made out of non-flammable materials. These hardy or cement board products. There's all sorts of things you can use. The outside wood siding. So replacing your siding with non-burnable. If you're thinking about siding replacement, the wood siding is nice, but if I kind of live in a high fire danger area or I'm worried about fire control, maybe consider at least fiber cement or brick, cement, masonry, stucco. You can do all those things. They have a better fire rating than wood siding. So we used to have a lot of wood shingles, shake and shingle, and then code made those things be fire treated. They were basically dunked, like stained with a fire treatment, but that would wear off. And so we're just seeing less and less wood shake because of fire control. And then trees and branches. Make sure you trim your stuff back. They're saying 10 feet. Just make sure you cut things back away from the house so that tree catches on fire. It doesn't just immediately touch the house. All right, the concept of creating space. And so I've got a couple slides around here, but in the fire safety thing, they call it defensible space. So I can defend these various zones easier by cleaning vegetation and pruning things back. And so you'll see the first zone is just, nothing. The second zone, maybe there's an occasional shrub or occasional tree. Third zone, 100 feet out, maybe a few more trees, but just lots less tree. And then after 100 feet, that's where you can get into your brush and forest and things like that. Now, I get it. All of us have property lines and we can't control, the Forest Service land or the state land, and we'll see some of those slides from the Maui fire. But we'll show that to you. But just understand, how is my defensible space and creating that space so the fire can't come up right up against my building. There's some space there that keeps the fire away. So the same kind of thinking goes for sheds, outbuildings with gas cans and lawnmowers, firewood piles. So we've all seen houses with the firewood piles stacked up against the back door because I don't want to go outside to get a new piece of firewood to put on the fire. But now I've just got a whole pile again of wood that's just going to catch on fire. So similar slide on defensible space, just another way to kind of think about it. Mown lawn, transitioning away to starting to get to trees and then lots of trees. So that's another graphic. Maybe it's easier to understand that. Okay, now we'll get into some case studies. We've got 3 or 4 of them on Hawaii and then three of them on the LA fires. So here's the before and here's the after. So this is the one standing house, and I'm showing you different houses. But you can see they have this big farmland or some kind of just brush back in here. Now, granted, that's not their property, but you can see kind of a road, maybe a few trees here. But what they've done and what experts say saved them is they had just a lot of defensible space, they call it. Just a lot of space, backyard, just open, as opposed to all these trees and shrubs and outbuildings and more buildings and things like that. You can see every place around them burned down. And even this farmland burned, and maybe that was where the fire came from, went into the neighborhood. So brush and space. So control what you can control. We can't go onto somebody else's property and trim things down, but you could talk to your neighbor and kind of come to an agreement. Burnable things, fences, decks, sheds. And there's another one, that the difference in fence. So a wood fence, again, the cedar fence, just a bunch of kindling. A stone fence or a block fence or a concrete wall, actually a barrier. Then roof types, so metal did better than asphalt. But you can see these red roofs here, good metal roofs, but they were toasted. The rest of the structure caught on fire. And so kind of yard relatively free from vegetation. And the article didn't say if the house was built out of fire resistant material. So another example, and the big thing that saved this house was a concrete fence versus a wood fence. And you can see, so that's the concrete fence. The white outline is what we're trying to show you, but that dark outline is the concrete fence. You can see the fire came up to it, stopped, and didn't burn through it. But again, lots of good open space, not a lot of brush, a driveway on both sides. And again, it's the only house standing in this big area that really got burned. So let's see, third house in Maui. This one I'll get into a little bit later, but it's kind of a dramatic picture of it. Everything again around it had burned. Even similar kind of roof types, looks like metal roofs. Similar roof types. These houses didn't survive, but I'll talk more about that one a little bit later. Another house again in Maui. Now this one was built out of fire-resistant building materials. It had stucco, it had double pane windows, tempered glass, it had asphalt roof shingles. It's only 10 feet away from its neighbors, but it still survived. Now all the neighbors didn't burn down. Let's go to the right slide. So the house next door burned. This one and this one lasted. I don't know if they were all built out of similar materials. Looks like, again, that fence or sport court kind of played a part. Houses across the street were gone. So, Okay, we're back to Maui. They call it the Miracle House. You can Google it. It's a 100-year-old wooden house, but it was really unscathed. Uh, and the reasons. So the article said the couples trimmed the trees back that leaned against the house. They laid river rock or river stone as a part of some of their landscaping. You can see some of it around here, around there, just to really cut back on the grass. Big commercial grade steel roof, and they did have a sprinkler system. So I'm going to talk briefly about interior sprinklers, but also exterior sprinklers. So I don't know if it was exterior sprinkler or not, but pretty dramatic photo there of why did that house last and the other one didn't. It's not even black. I don't know if they pressure washed off the smoke or not, but pretty interesting. Same house, different angle. Here's those reasons. Here's the house for sale before. Here it is after. Okay, let's get into LA. So here is the one standing house, and it's actually, this is coming from an architect posted on X by Chase and Greg. So he's emphasizing the design side of basically extra insulation, air tightness, and no eave situation. So you can see no eaves here. Now, again, we like eaves because they protect from rain and water, but he's pulling the eaves back for better fire protection. And a stone perimeter fence, and it's kind of the results are in the details here. These houses next door really burned down. So you'll see more of this as the code comes back to rebuild California, of fire rating on your eaves, fire rated walls, maybe moving to 2 hours instead of just 1 hour. The passive house strategy is called. You can Google that. Higher insulation, airtight. Airtight meaning the air couldn't blow through, so the air or wind couldn't carry embers into the house. And so we can't, it doesn't spread the fire as much. I don't know what the exterior is. It looks to be wood, but I think it's maybe even a manufactured looking wood. So, but anyway, that house survived intact. Again, by kind of simple things, removing the eaves and putting a stone wall around it, and airtight and good windows really minimized destruction. Okay, so fireproofing inside, we're going to talk some, condos and HOA communities. So the photo is an example of what we call interior sill plate penetrations. So all these holes, the electrician has to drill a bunch of holes to get his wire down. The ductwork guy has to cut a big hole to get his duct work down. And so you'll see this red or pink spray foam, and that fills the gap. So again, we're talking airflow. So if I have a fire downstairs, it can go around the wire or through those holes, around these things, if there's no sealant there. So this spray foam fire sealant around these penetrations stops the fire spread. And then again, roof composition is another big one. Metal or asphalt, or several slate, tile, stone. So lots of things you can use to reduce fire from basic design things and basic construction things. So then part two is that draft stopping, or that we call it party walls and or firewalls. And so it's how you separate the attic between units. And so here's a picture down here. You can see the trusses. That's the bottom of the roof sheathing. I'm looking up. So here's this party wall, and it's drywalled off and at least fire taped. That's that first layer of tape and mud. It doesn't have to be finished because we're not painting it, but it stops the fire. So if I remember on that first picture, I had fire coming up the outside, getting in through the eaves, really causing havoc in here, but not getting over to the other side and causing more damage. So I would say half the attics we go into have firewalls, and another half of those aren't done right. They aren't taped. There's big holes in them. So it's really important to check that. And then from a previous episode, good firewalls prevent froggers, Phrogger, from kind of going in between units. So we did another video on that, and we'd see an unscrupulous person here go up into their attic access and then walk over and find their neighbor's attic access and drop down in and steal their things and do what they wanted to do in there and then sneak away. And so if you got a good wall there, you keep that from happening. So good for fire spread and Frogger control. Okay, so fireproofing again. Here's our gyp sheathing, or what's left of it. And so this is an example of water intrusion really getting in behind the WRB and flashings and siding and really causing damage. So we can see the gyp sheathing crumbling and flaking away and just missing here and here. It's just washed away. And so now I've got nice, soft, punky wood that really lights on fire and burns really well, saying it's not soaking wet. So that's the point of making sure that we've got good gyp sheathing, good waterproofing details, so that when you do have a fire, your components are working well together. And so window ratings, sidings, and decks, thinking about the robustness of this. So if I'm in more of a wildfire prone zone, I'm going to be higher robustness. If I'm in Pacific Northwest where there's not a lot of fires, and the trees are all cut down and, I don't have a lot of brush, maybe I don't have to go as robust. And so you can talk to your building envelope designer and say, how should I start planning for this? We need a new roof in 5 years. We need new siding and windows in a few years. Now's the time to start thinking about it. Okay. And then, fireproofing. We've talked about, this is an interior fire sprinkler. And the interior fire sprinklers are becoming the norm. They entered the code under, a few years back in residential, and then density of residential. They've been in commercial and schools and stuff like that for a long time. But you'll see more and more requirements for them to be in residential and single family home. So this is for an interior fire, starts on the kitchen, the sprinklers turn on. Exterior fire, we'll talk about those sprinklers in a minute. So again, landscaping, defensible space. Remember, the houses that stood, they dug out the lawn, they put in rockery, river rock, concrete, pavers, maybe some bark, maybe some accent stones, some small brush or bushes, landscaping, but very easy to maintain, probably very drought tolerant, and there's nothing there to burn. And it gives you that space, that defensible space, so that fire can't come right up against your building. So this is a good example of landscaping using a fire-wise landscaping. Okay, so fire-wise, again, defensible space, but let's run through this real quick. So chimney's clean, 100 feet of garden hose that's hooked up and attached. So if you do have a problem, you can pull the hose out real quick and deal with it. They have a 30-foot zone saying vegetation is mowed, I guess, 30 feet and 100 feet. So every lawn is mowed 100 feet away from the house. No standing tall grass. Grass is green and mowed. Wood piles, firewood piles, combustibles, 30 feet away from the house. Sorry, you got to put on your slippers to go get some more firewood. Sheds not built under your deck with gas cans in them. They're over there. They're away from the place. The lawnmower and all the whatever is over there. Compost piles of leaves and brush, whatever it is, away from the house again. And then this is always a good one. The driveway is accessible. It's clearly marked. Address is visible. So when I do have to call, they know where to go. They can find the address and get there quickly. Okay. Ember awareness checklist. So this is again put out by I forgot who was put out by. This is put out by the Department of Forestry and actually the Utah Forest Department. And so again, they talk about blowing of embers, and they go through this roof and roof openings and roof debris, skylights, spark arresters, 20 items. And so I think this will be in the chat. You can download this. Patio furniture. I didn't think about that. Barbecues, anything that's pushed up against your siding. Again, you can walk through this. You can kind of use it as a checklist, go through your building, be aware of it, and start making an action plan there.
This podcast is part of J2's free live webinar, The Building Doctor Show. To attend the live show and ask your questions during the Q&A, visit www.j2consultants.com.